Part 1. The moment after losing. It's over. The bet is gone. The number missed by half a point. The reel stopped one symbol short. The parlay died on the final leg. And yet you're not thinking about loss. Not yet. You're thinking about how close it was. About what it would have meant if it hit. About how next time it will. Your pulse is still racing. Your hands are warm, your jaw tight, your vision a little narrow. You don't know it, but your body is still inside the chase, because chemically, you haven't lost yet. The dopamine hasn't crashed. It's hovering, waiting for the next spark of hope to ignite it again. That's the first illusion of gambling addiction. The loss isn't when the money disappears. The loss is when the body stops believing it can win it back. In those moments after a bet fails, the brain lights up like a storm. The prefrontal cortex, logic, restraint, reasoning, goes dim. The limbic system takes over. Adrenaline, cortisol, dopamine. It's a chemical cocktail of survival and craving, indistinguishable from fear or hunger. You feel alive and dead at the same time. The rush that was meant to reward victory now drives desperation. The same neurotransmitters that evolved to help humans hunt, compete, and survive are now aimed at a glowing rectangle in your hand. Your brain doesn't know it's a game. It thinks it's life or death. So it sends one message loud and clear: fix this. Gamblers call it the chase. Clinicians call it loss-chasing behavior. Neuroscientists call it the continuation of dopaminergic activation despite negative outcomes. But no term captures what it really feels like. It's not greed. It's rescue. You're not trying to win. You're trying to undo losing. And that distinction changes everything. Because once your mind frames recovery as redemption, every future bet feels noble. It feels like a comeback story. And comeback stories are the most powerful lies the brain can tell. In a healthy reward system, dopamine spikes when you win and falls when you don't. But in a gambler's brain, the spike comes from the anticipation, the moment before the result, the maybe, the almost, the what if. That's why the crash after a loss doesn't stop the chase. It amplifies it. Because the absence of reward feels like unfinished business. The brain demands closure. And the only way to get closure is another spin, another bet, another chance. It's a perfect loop. Loss triggers hope. Hope triggers dopamine. Dopamine demands action. Action creates more loss. Repeat until collapse. In that loop, time warps. 5 minutes become 2 hours. $100 becomes, I'll get it back later, and later becomes tomorrow, and tomorrow becomes next paycheck. The chase erases memory. It rewrites reality. Every near miss, every bad beat, every time you were so close, it all stacks into a phantom narrative where winning isn't random anymore. It's due. You stop gambling to win. You gamble to make sense of losing. This is the quiet horror of gambling addiction. The brain confuses loss with progress. It interprets pain as proximity to reward. It tells you that the suffering means you're close. That if you just stay in the game a little longer, everything will balance out. But the game never balances out. It was designed not to. And by the time you realize that, the body's chemistry has already made the decision for you. Your hands are moving before your thoughts catch up. You're placing another bet not because you believe, but because belief is the only thing holding you together. Every gambler remembers that moment. Not the big win, not even the worst loss, but that quiet in-between, where logic whispers, walk away, and something deeper screams, one more. That's the point where addiction takes over. Not with fireworks, but with a whisper that sounds exactly like hope. The chase doesn't start with winning. It starts with not being able to stop losing. Part 2. The biology of the bet. Every addiction begins as a shortcut to pleasure. But gambling is different. It's not a chemical you consume. It's a chemical your brain produces against its own will. To understand the chase, you have to understand the circuitry behind it. The biological slot machine hidden inside every human mind. Deep in the midbrain lies a strip of tissue called the mesolimbic dopamine pathway. It connects two regions that dictate nearly everything about human motivation: the ventral tegmental area, VTA, the ignition switch; the nucleus accumbens, the reward center, where desire becomes movement. When you experience something pleasurable, a laugh, a kiss, a jackpot, neurons in the VTA fire and flood the nucleus accumbens with dopamine. That chemical surge doesn't create happiness, it creates anticipation. It tells the body, do that again. Evolution built this loop for survival, to help us chase food, reproduction, discovery. But gambling hacks it perfectly. It replaces survival cues with uncertainty. And uncertainty, it turns out, is stronger than reward. Psychologists discovered this decades ago. B.F. Skinner's pigeons didn't peck because they were hungry. They pecked because they didn't know when the food would come. The pattern was called a variable ratio reward schedule. In plain language, rewards given at random intervals create the highest rate of repeated behavior. Casinos, video games, stock apps, even social media notifications all use that same structure. It's why slot machines pay out unpredictably, why sports betting odds change mid-game, why the next swipe might be a match. Your brain interprets randomness as potential, and potential is addictive. When a gambler places a bet, dopamine spikes before the outcome, not after. That's the biological twist that turns risk into obsession. The reward system fires hardest in the anticipatory phase, when the outcome is uncertain but the fantasy is alive. Neuroimaging studies show gamblers' reward centers light up the moment a wager is made, then crash regardless of win or loss. It's the expectation that feels good, not the result. The body learns to crave suspense. That's why even after devastating losses, the gambler's mind whispers one more. It's not chasing money. It's chasing that anticipatory high. In the 1980s, neuroscientists at University College London discovered the near-miss phenomenon. When gamblers saw two matching symbols and a third just off the line, their brains reacted as if they'd almost won. Functional MRI scans revealed activation in the same dopamine circuits as actual victories. In other words, almost winning feels biologically like progress. That's the trap. The system rewards you for failure, as long as it looks like success. Casinos turned that quirk into an art form, spacing near misses with surgical precision to keep players suspended between loss and hope. Sports bettors feel it when the final leg of a parlay misses by inches. Poker players feel it when they fold the hand that would have hit. Each near miss burns itself into neural memory, convincing the brain it's learning, improving, getting closer. It's not. It's conditioning. Humans are wired to associate repetition with mastery. When you practice a skill, dopamine reinforces progress, a perfect evolutionary design. But gambling fakes that feedback. The brain mistakes random outcomes for skill-based results. That's why a losing streak feels like a training montage. You think you're adjusting, adapting, reading the field, when in reality, the odds never move. That cognitive glitch, known as the illusion of control, turns statistical chance into emotional certainty. It's the reason traders double down, poker players tilt, and bettors convince themselves the next one is their time. Dopamine isn't the only chemical at play. When risk enters the equation, adrenaline surges, sharpening focus, quickening the pulse. Cortisol joins in to manage stress. Together they create the electric tension gamblers describe as the rush. In moderation, that cocktail enhances performance. But in excess, it hijacks rational thought. During high-stakes play, the body is in a fight-or-flight state. Blood diverts from the prefrontal cortex, the reasoning center, to muscles and reflexes. It's not analysis, it's instinct. That's why gamblers often say they blacked out or weren't thinking. They weren't. Their biology was. Each win, near miss, and emotional spike leaves a biochemical footprint. Neurons that fire together, wire together. The brain's golden rule of learning. Over time, those connections solidify into a feedback loop where cues trigger cravings automatically. The sound of coins, the buzz of a phone, the phrase "lock of the week" all become keys to the same neural lock. Even after months of abstinence, one cue can reignite the entire circuit. That's why relapse feels instantaneous. It isn't a moral failure, it's a memory firing. Eventually, the system rewires itself. Dopamine receptors down-regulate from overstimulation. What once produced excitement now barely registers. You need bigger bets, longer sessions, riskier plays just to feel normal. This is the tipping point where the chase stops being optional. It's not about pleasure anymore. It's about relief from emptiness. The brain isn't chasing joy. It's avoiding withdrawal. That's the biological architecture of gambling addiction. A loop built on anticipation, amplified by randomness, sealed by memory, and sustained by chemical exhaustion. It's not weakness. It's wiring. And unless something interrupts that wiring, the chase doesn't end. It just changes form. From bets to markets, from parlays to apps, from reels to rewards. Different stage, same circuitry. The body keeps playing long after the money's gone. The illusion of control is the most seductive lie in gambling. It's the idea that if you study enough, bet smart enough, manage emotion well enough, you can bend chance into submission. It's the belief that the outcome isn't random anymore. It's personal. Every gambler has felt it. The quiet certainty that this one will be different because you're different now. It begins innocently, with a few wins that feel earned. You spotted a pattern, made a sharp call, read momentum like an insider. The brain, desperate to find order in chaos, rewards that perception with dopamine, the chemical signature of confidence. It doesn't care if the success was random. It just knows you predicted it. That spark of mastery hardens into identity. You're no longer a participant. You're the one who gets it. But randomness always reclaims the wheel. Losses follow wins, not as punishment, but as statistics catching up. Yet the mind resists that truth. Cognitive psychologists call it the illusion of control, the tendency to overestimate one's influence over events determined by chance. It's why people blow on dice, why poker players tap the table the same way every time, why sports bettors believe they can feel the outcome before kickoff. The irony is that intelligence doesn't protect you from it. In fact, smarter people often fall harder. They have more tools to rationalize. Every loss becomes a problem to solve, every streak a data set to analyze. The chase disguises itself as logic. You're not addicted, you're studying. You're not losing, you're recalibrating. You're not desperate, you're due. This belief system runs deeper than pride. It's rooted in the human brain's intolerance for uncertainty. We are pattern-seeking animals. Evolution trained us to link cause and effect even where none exists, because missing a real pattern could have meant death. That ancient instinct, once useful for survival, now fuels delusion. Your mind searches the randomness of cards, odds, and spreads for meaning it will never find, and every false pattern feels like proof you're learning. The gambler's fallacy is born from that same circuitry. When something happens less often than expected, we assume it's due. If a roulette wheel lands on black 5 times in a row, the next spin must be red. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that calculates probability, knows that's false. But the emotional brain whispers otherwise, and emotion wins. In that whisper lies the whole architecture of addiction, the feeling that you can outsmart the math because you feel the rhythm. In studies of compulsive gamblers, researchers found that even after being shown that outcomes were random, participants still bet as if their decisions mattered. The moment they felt on a roll, their neural activity shifted from analytical regions to reward circuits. They weren't thinking anymore. They were predicting through emotion. Confidence itself became intoxicating. That's why gambling doesn't just distort money. It distorts time, reality, and self-perception. After enough cycles of risk and relief, you stop remembering which outcomes were skill and which were luck. You remember only the ones that confirm your narrative. The wins prove you're good. The losses prove you're close. Either way, the story always ends with one more bet. This illusion also feeds a dangerous kind of hope. Because if you believe you control the outcome, then losing isn't failure. It's unfinished work. That hope is what keeps people glued to screens at 3 a.m., convinced they can think their way out of chaos. The more they lose, the more personal it feels, and the deeper the trap becomes. What was once chance now feels like destiny. Gambling operators understand this perfectly. They don't fight the illusion of control. They nurture it. They design interfaces that mimic analytics dashboards, filled with graphs and stats that make you feel informed. Sportsbooks feed bettors a constant stream of insights, hot streaks, and trends. Slot machines flash skill-based minigames that imply precision matters. Everything is staged to keep you believing that discipline can beat randomness, that the right data will outsmart fate. It never will. Underneath the glow and statistics, every outcome still follows probability. The house edge is constant, the randomness absolute. But belief is stronger than math. Gamblers don't chase numbers, they chase meaning. And meaning, once attached to luck, becomes impossible to surrender. That's why people return after swearing off forever. Not because they forgot the pain, but because they remember the sense of control. The moment when the world seemed predictable again. When they were the ones making sense of chaos. Control, even imaginary, is intoxicating. And the addiction doesn't end when the money does. It ends when the illusion finally breaks. When that day comes, when the gambler looks back and realizes that all their effort, all their study, all their obsession never once changed the math. There's a strange silence that follows. It's not relief. It's mourning. The illusion dies, and with it, the identity that believed. That's the cruelest truth about gambling. You can't beat the game because the game was never against you. It was always inside you, wired into the need to predict, to master, to make randomness make sense. You don't lose to chance. You lose to control itself. There comes a point in every gambler's story when the outside world fades. The lights blur, The hum of machines or the silence of the phone fills the air, and something inside clicks into autopilot. You stop making decisions. You start performing them. This is the trance, the machine zone, the space where gambling stops being a game and becomes an environment. It begins slowly. You tell yourself you'll play for 10 minutes, maybe one session, just until you feel better. But 10 minutes dissolve unnoticed. Your breathing steadies, your posture locks in. Losses no longer sting. Wins barely register. All that remains is repetition. Neuroscientists call this dissociative absorption. The prefrontal cortex, the command center of planning and reflection, quietly powers down. Activity shifts to the striatum, the part of the brain that handles habits and automatic sequences. You are still conscious, but not self-aware. The brain has switched from narrative to loop. Casinos learned long ago to cultivate this state. No clocks, no windows, steady temperature, rhythmic sounds, endless availability. The environment removes every cue that might break the spell. Online platforms copied it perfectly. Infinite scroll, quick reload, frictionless deposits. Each feature engineered to eliminate pause. In the trance, time stops behaving. Minutes expand and collapse unpredictably. You feel suspended in a bubble where consequences don't exist yet. Psychologists studying slot machine players found they could sit motionless for hours without realizing it, their brainwaves resembling those of people in deep meditation. Except the purpose isn't peace, it's escape. The escape isn't from money, it's from self. For many, gambling is the only time the noise of guilt, failure, and fear quiets down. Inside the loop, there's no past or future, only now, and now is mercifully numb. That's why people return even when they hate what it's doing to them. The trance is a reprieve, pain deferred by repetition. Physiologically, the state is measurable. Heart rate variability decreases. Cortisol levels stabilize even as losses mount. The nervous system interprets the pattern itself as safety. The body would rather stay in predictable chaos than face unpredictable silence. Addiction isn't only pursuit of pleasure, it's fear of re-entry into reality. Researchers describe a phenomenon called flow, a state of complete immersion often celebrated in artists and athletes. The machine zone is its dark twin, focused, effortless, detached, but aimed at nothing. In healthy flow, the mind merges with purpose. In the gambling trance, it merges with void. You are not achieving, you are erasing. That erasure becomes addictive because it feels like relief. Each spin, each refresh, each wager dulls the edges of self-awareness. You forget the bills, the fights, the disappointments. You forget you were trying to forget. The longer you stay inside, the harder it becomes to remember why you ever wanted to stop. When gamblers describe this state, they rarely mention excitement. They talk about calm. They talk about stillness, about disappearing into motion. That's the paradox. The body racing, the mind gone quiet. A synthetic serenity bought with chaos. Eventually, exhaustion breaks the spell. The screen goes dark. The session ends. The silence floods back in. For a brief second, you feel weightless, as though you've been released from gravity. Then the crash hits. The adrenaline drains, dopamine plummets, and the emptiness you were hiding from returns, doubled. That's when shame walks back into the room. The trance never really ends. It pauses. The brain remembers the doorway, the sequence of cues that led there. One sound, one notification, one commercial can reopen it. That's why people who quit still dream of betting, still feel phantom urges during stress. The mind has built a parallel world where escape is always one click away. In that world, there is no win, no loss, no goal. There is only continuation. It's not about pleasure anymore. It's about existence inside the loop. And once you've lived there, reality feels too loud, too slow, too real. That is the trance. The moment the game stops needing you to believe, because it has already replaced belief with routine. It doesn't matter if you think you're done. The body knows the way back. When the trance finally breaks, the silence feels foreign. The buzz of the machine, the flicker of the screen, the rhythm that carried you, gone. For a moment you sit perfectly still, unsure whether the session lasted minutes or hours. Then the noise inside returns. It starts in the body. The adrenaline that kept you upright drains away. Muscles ache as though you've been sprinting. Your stomach knots. Your mouth is dry. Your heartbeat slows to an irregular crawl. The dopamine that once surged in expectation collapses, leaving a hollow ache where excitement used to live. Neuroscientists call it post-reinforcement depression, the brain's chemical hangover after an overstimulated reward system. Cortisol, the stress hormone, spikes to replace the fallen dopamine. It's the body's emergency brake, dragging you back toward equilibrium. But balance feels unbearable. After hours of artificial anticipation, calm feels like emptiness, and emptiness feels like failure. That's when panic begins to whisper. You replay every hand, every spin, every leg of the parlay in forensic detail, looking for the one mistake that doomed you. If you can find the reason, maybe you can reverse it next time. This is the second trap. Rumination, a cognitive loop where the brain tries to transform shame into strategy. The same neural pathways that once chased reward now chase explanation. You aren't searching for understanding, you're searching for permission to go back. Psychologically, the crash is indistinguishable from withdrawal. The gambler's brain, deprived of dopamine, interprets the deficit as danger. Symptoms mirror those of stimulant detox: anxiety, irritability, restlessness, insomnia. Clinical studies show heightened activity in the amygdala, the brain's fear center, immediately after heavy gambling sessions. You don't just feel bad, you feel threatened. And because the threat is internal, the only perceived escape is another hit of uncertainty. That's why relapse so often happens within hours. The mind frames the next bet not as recklessness, but as repair. You tell yourself it's about getting even, proving control, erasing humiliation. Biologically, it's about restoring neurochemical balance. The next wager becomes medicine for the sickness caused by the last one. Emotionally, the crash carries a unique flavor of guilt. Guilt without resolution. With substances, there's an external culprit you can blame. With gambling, the weapon was your own decision. That self-inflicted nature turns remorse into self-disgust. You swear you'll never do it again, and in that vow you feel a flicker of relief, another small surge of dopamine. The brain records it as progress, not punishment. Even repentance becomes part of the loop. Family and friends often misread this phase as clarity, but it's closer to paralysis. Inside, two systems are fighting: the rational cortex drafting promises, and the reward circuitry quietly planning its next opportunity. It's a biochemical tug-of-war where sincerity doesn't guarantee control. You mean it when you say you're done. You also mean it when you say you'll win it back. Both truths coexist until one of them finds a trigger. During the crash, sleep rarely comes easy. The mind replays highlight reels of what almost worked, what nearly hit. Every near miss lights up the same neural clusters as a win, reigniting dopamine just enough to keep you restless. You drift between shame and fantasy until morning, caught in the half-dream of redemption. By sunrise, the brain has reframed the narrative again. The pain of loss dulls faster than you expect. The analytical mind edits the memory, trimming out the despair and amplifying the excitement. That's reward memory bias, the tendency to recall the thrill more vividly than the crash. It's nature's cruel attempt to protect you from trauma, and it ensures you'll return to the very thing that caused it. For most gamblers, this cycle, trance, crash, resolve, relapse, becomes the heartbeat of addiction. It's not the money that keeps them trapped. It's the oscillation between chaos and calm. Each swing resets the chemistry, briefly making life feel vivid again. Without the game, the world feels flat. So the crash, unbearable as it is, becomes proof that they were alive. The recovery community calls this emotional dysregulation. The addict's baseline has shifted. Ordinary peace no longer registers as comfort. It feels like boredom, and boredom feels like withdrawal. The nervous system, trained for volatility, now demands it. There's a moment, usually after an especially brutal loss, when the gambler finally stops chasing and simply stares. No adrenaline, no hope, just the realization that nothing outside will fix what's happening inside. It's a moment of awful clarity, brief and fragile. Some reach for help right there. Most don't. Because clarity isn't comforting, it's grief. You're not mourning the money. You're mourning the illusion that you were ever in control. The crash is that funeral. It strips away fantasy until only two instincts remain: hide or rebuild. And rebuilding means facing a brain that no longer trusts its own chemistry. It means learning to live without the constant pulse of possibility. It means letting boredom come back as a sign of healing, not failure. But in the hours after the crash, none of that seems possible. All you know is the silence, the shaking hands, the thought that maybe, if you could just win once, the noise would quiet again. That's how the next chase begins, born from the ashes of the last one, powered by the same circuitry that swore it was finished. Long after the cards are gone and the accounts are deleted, the brain still remembers, not in words or thoughts, but in chemistry. Every spin, every sound, every near miss left a trace, tiny electrical signatures buried in networks that don't forget. Addiction lives there, not as memory, but as readiness. All it needs is a spark. Neuroscientists call it cue-induced craving. When a recovering gambler sees an ad, hears a crowd roar, or catches the faint chime of a slot machine in a commercial, the limbic system lights up as if the game were happening again. Dopamine surges before logic intervenes. It's a false start, a biochemical flashback. The conscious mind says, "I'm over this," but the body replies, "We're back in it." Inside the amygdala and hippocampus, regions that store emotional learning, those cues have priority access. They bypass reasoning and speak directly to reflex. That's why relapse often feels instantaneous. One image, one notification, one joke about odds, and suddenly you're halfway to placing a bet. It's not a choice. It's a reflex dressed as choice. Brain scans of abstinent gamblers show that even years later, exposure to gambling imagery triggers increased activity in the ventral striatum, the same region responsible for craving in cocaine users. The circuits don't disappear with abstinence. They lie dormant like fire under ash. Therapy, support groups, recovery programs, they teach you to keep the ashes cold, but the fuel remains. The industry knows this too. They design advertisements around nostalgia, the music, the slogans, the faces of old heroes celebrating responsible fun. Every pixel is calibrated to wake dormant pathways. They call it re-engagement. Clinicians call it sabotage. Even the brain's reward memory betrays recovery. It exaggerates the highs and blurs the lows. The nights of terror fade. The brief wins sharpen. You remember laughter, confidence, camaraderie, not the panic afterward. It's selective editing, driven by dopamine's role in encoding emotional salience. The brain doesn't preserve reality, it preserves significance. And in gambling, significance is measured in spikes, not consequences. This is why distance and abstinence alone aren't cure. Recovery requires retraining attention. Each time you notice a trigger without obeying it, new neural connections form. The prefrontal cortex, the region for decision and restraint, slowly reasserts authority. It's called neuroplastic repair, the process of teaching the brain to interpret cues as warnings, not invitations. But it takes time, repetition, and often help. There's no switch to flip. It's the slow rebuilding of meaning. In early recovery, this vigilance feels exhausting. Every commercial, every sports score, every payday becomes a test. But that effort is the workout the brain needs. Each resisted urge weakens the old circuitry by millimeters. Eventually, the cravings shrink from roars to whispers, though they never vanish entirely. Some people describe sudden flashbacks, brief, vivid sensations of betting even while doing something mundane, a flicker of adrenaline, a phantom sound, a microburst of hope. It lasts seconds, then passes, leaving confusion behind. Those moments aren't relapse. They're echoes of the wiring that once defined survival. Acknowledging them without action is how new pathways solidify. The tragedy is that most people misinterpret these echoes as failure. They think craving means weakness, when it actually means the brain is healing through confrontation. Recovery isn't silence. It's noise you learn to endure without responding. The craving that once commanded becomes background hum. You stop fighting it. You start outlasting it. Still, the system that remembers also remembers relief. In times of stress or loneliness, the old promise resurfaces. One win could fix it all. That fantasy doesn't die easily because it was never logical. It was sensory, emotional, spiritual. It was hope distilled into chemistry. And chemistry doesn't negotiate. It repeats. Understanding this doesn't erase risk, but it restores compassion. Addiction isn't a moral defect. It's memory misused. Your brain learned to survive through gambling, even if it kills everything else. To unlearn that is to redefine safety itself. So the brain remembers, yes, but it can also remember differently. With each day of distance, each conversation, each moment of discomfort survived, a counter-memory forms. One where survival isn't tied to a result, where relief comes from truth instead of chance. That's the quiet miracle of recovery. Teaching an organ built for repetition to believe in stillness. And in that stillness, a strange peace returns. Not the manic thrill of winning, not the relief of losing, but a gentler signal, proof that you can live without the chase and still feel real. The old memories stay, but they lose their authority. They become history, not prophecy. The brain remembers everything, but it can learn what to ignore. Recovery doesn't begin when the gambling stops. It begins when the gambler realizes that stopping isn't the same as healing. For a while, the absence of betting feels like progress. The accounts are closed, the apps deleted, the notifications silenced. Friends congratulate you. Family exhales. But inside, the chemistry still waits, pacing like an animal behind glass. The world praises abstinence because it looks clean. But recovery isn't clean. It's messy, uneven, humiliating. It's the slow realization that you can quit gambling and still think like a gambler. You can still crave risk, chaos, instant relief. You can still treat relationships, work, and emotions like bets to be won or lost. The game changes form. The wiring stays. Addiction is a language the brain doesn't forget. In early recovery, it tries to speak through substitutions. You chase productivity, validation, perfection, anything that sparks the same brief surge of dopamine. You tell yourself it's healthier, and maybe it is, but the pattern is identical. Anticipation, reward, crash, repeat. You've stopped gambling with money. Now you gamble with identity. Therapists call this addiction transfer, the migration of compulsion from one behavior to another when the underlying craving for regulation remains unmet. The gambler's brain, stripped of its familiar drug, searches for new odds to calculate, new uncertainty to master. It might be trading, dieting, social media, even relationships. Anything unpredictable enough to keep the loop alive. That's why recovery feels like losing purpose at first. The chase once provided structure, ritual, rhythm. Days revolved around it. Feelings had direction. Without it, time stretches wide and empty. The absence of stimulation masquerades as sadness, but it's actually withdrawal from chaos. You miss the noise because silence forces you to listen. Many relapse here. Not out of defiance, but nostalgia. The brain mistakes discomfort for danger and runs back to what once numbed it. Relapse isn't rebellion. It's the nervous system begging for familiarity. It takes dozens of false starts before the mind learns that stillness isn't punishment. It's healing disguised as boredom. The recovery illusion is the belief that abstinence equals immunity, that if you stay away long enough, the wiring will disappear. But neural pathways don't dissolve. They quiet. They wait for stress, loneliness, or joy, any extreme, to reactivate. The danger isn't forgetting how much gambling hurt you. It's forgetting how quickly it can feel good again. Clinicians see this pattern constantly. Months of progress followed by a single trigger. A sports season starting, a promotion, an argument. The rational voice says, "You've changed." The reward circuit says, "Let's see." And before logic can intervene, the finger moves, the bet is placed, and the loop reawakens. Yet each return isn't total failure. It's information. The mind learns where its armor is thin. Shame says, "You'll never get it right." Reality says, "You're learning how not to lie to yourself." True recovery isn't purity, it's awareness. It's knowing exactly how the trap works and choosing, 1 hour at a time, not to step in. Slowly, the brain rewires around truth instead of thrill. Dopamine begins responding to smaller, steadier rewards. Sleep, connection, routine. The emotional thermostat resets. What once felt flat now feels peaceful. It's subtle, easy to miss. But that subtlety is freedom returning. Some describe this phase as color returning to the world. Food tastes again. Music lands differently. Conversations stop feeling like transactions. There's no jackpot moment, just the slow discovery that ordinary life was what the chase was hiding all along. And even then, the ghost remains. The gambler inside doesn't vanish. It evolves. It becomes the part of you that knows what obsession sounds like and what silence costs. You start recognizing the same hunger in others, in workaholics, doom scrollers, adrenaline chasers, and you feel less alone. The addiction that once isolated you becomes a lens through which you understand everyone else. That's the quiet victory of recovery. You stop trying to erase the gambler and start learning from him. He's proof of how deeply you can care, how fiercely you can focus, how unwilling you are to give up on hope. Those traits aren't curses. They just need new direction. Eventually, you realize the goal was never to stop gambling. It was to stop needing gambling to feel alive. When that moment comes, you don't celebrate. You breathe. Because peace after years of chaos feels almost supernatural in its simplicity. The illusion of recovery dies there, replaced by something truer. Maintenance, vigilance, humility. You don't graduate from addiction. You learn to live alongside it, keeping it quiet, never forgetting what wakes it. Freedom isn't forgetting the chase. It's knowing it's always waiting and walking away anyway. There's a sound gamblers never forget. Not the clatter of chips or the digital chime of a win, but the silence that follows the last loss. It's the sound of reality coming back. For some, it's unbearable. For others, it's the first honest moment they've had in years. Addiction doesn't vanish when the bets stop. It lingers in the pauses, in boredom, in stress, in success. The same circuits that once demanded chaos wait patiently for permission to speak again. And yet, for the first time, you learn that you don't have to answer. The chase was never really about money. It was about meaning. It was about finding something powerful enough to make the noise inside quiet down. The tragedy is that the quiet was always available. It just never felt earned. You thought peace had to be won. You thought stillness had to be bought. But the real win is realizing that nothing external can complete what was never missing, only ignored. You start to see how the same patterns echo everywhere, how society rewards the chase, how algorithms amplify it, how the whole world runs on near misses and dopamine. You weren't weak. You were human in an inhuman system. You were responding exactly the way you were designed to. That understanding doesn't erase the damage, but it gives it meaning. The pain becomes evidence, proof that you survived something engineered to destroy you from the inside out. And survival, in this context, is rebellion. So you keep rebuilding, slowly, one ordinary moment at a time. You learn that boredom is a luxury, that quiet is strength, that being okay with enough is the only way to win a game built on more. And every time the old thoughts surface, every time the brain whispers, just one more, you recognize the voice, thank it for its warning, and let it pass. That's not weakness, that's mastery. The chase isn't over. It never will be. But now, it has nowhere to go. You stopped running, and it stopped winning. If this story resonated, if you've seen yourself in these words or someone you love, don't disappear back into the noise. Subscribe to Winning Without Wagers. Because understanding gambling isn't just about recovery. It's about waking up to the system that profits when you stay asleep. Every week, we uncover another layer of the world's most profitable addiction. The tactics, the psychology, the hope that survives beneath it all. Join us. Learn the game they don't want you to see, and start taking your mind and your life